Hey everyone, and welcome to a new video on this channel. This time about the basics of the distributed application runtime, or Dapr. In a previous video, I looked at how to use Dapr from Azure Functions. But of course, Azure Functions is a layer of abstraction on top of Dapr, which already is a layer of abstraction on top of many other things. So let's just take a look at how Dapr works without anything in between. We're going to cut the amount of theory short, but basically Dapr provides all kinds of services that you see there in the bottom. And so service to service invocation, state management, actors, tracing, and so on. And these features are all very easily accessible over an HTTP API or the gRPC API. In the example I'm going to show you, we're going to use the HTTP API because everybody basically knows how HTTP works, or most of you will know. And of course, because the Dapr is used from those two types of APIs, you can use any piece of code or any framework that is able to, for example, talk HTTP to a remote service, which is basically anything. In this case, we're going to write two small services, one in Node, one in Python. And by the way, when I say write, I used the Hello World sample from the Dapr examples for this, just to show you how it works. It's not about the code here, it's about how Dapr does its job, right? Now, when you are going to run this in Kubernetes, of course, there is some additional plumbing involved here. So what you see here, there are two services. In my example, there will also be two services. And in Kubernetes, such a service is typically a container running in a pod. And there will also be another container in that pod, which we call the Dapr sidecar. And the application that we write will talk to Dapr over localhost using HTTP, for instance, to use Dapr functionality. So for example, if my service A has to save some state to, let's say, Redis, it will use HTTP calls to the Dapr sidecar to save the state or read the state from a Redis database. From the other point of view, if service B has to call service A, for instance, well, service B will actually talk to Dapr to do a remote service invocation of a method on service A. And then of course the Dapr sidecars in the different pods will talk to each other. Now, in this example, we're not going to deploy to Kubernetes just yet, and we'll just work with everything locally on the machine, and also show a couple of the extensions in Visual Studio Code that you can use for that. So let's see how this actually is done. And we have two applications here, as I said. So this is the Hello World example, as you can see here. And the Hello World example has a couple of folders here. In my case, it has a deploy folder for Kubernetes manifests. Not important right now, but the actual Node and Python services are here. Now, the Node service, it's the one which is using the Dapr state functionality. So let's look at the Node service first. And this is, as I said, the Hello World sample from the Dapr sample repository on GitHub. It's a simple Express application. So it's using the Express framework for Node. Again, it's not about the code here, but the fact is you need to understand how Dapr makes it easy to work with a state store. And as I said, you need to talk to Dapr over the HTTP protocol. And when you want to do something like saving state or reading state, as I said, you'll talk to localhost to Dapr running on some kind of port. The default port is 3500, but you could change that. And then to talk or to work with state, you use v1.0/state, and then the name of a state store, right? Now, the state store name in this case is just this here, state store. Now, you decide what the name of the state store is. This is just the default state store installed on my local machine when Dapr gets installed, and that is Redis, right? Now, how do you install Dapr? Well, if you first, of course, download it from the Dapr website, you would just do Dapr init, and with Dapr init, Dapr gets installed on your local workstation, and a couple of extra services are installed as well, or I should say containers are installed. If you look at that with Docker PS, not that one, Docker PS, you'll see that there's a Redis container there. Now the Redis container is the one used by default to keep state. And the state store that you see here actually refers to this container, right? That's something that you should know when you start working with Dapr, or you start working with the samples, that you have an idea of what happens when you post something to this URL. Well, state will be saved. It will be saved in this Redis database. Now, the application itself, so the Express application has two handlers, a get handler / order, and that's of course one to pick up the state. Now, let's first see how we can write state. That's this one here, the new order, which should be posted to. So if some remote service wants to put a new order in the state store, it would post to a new order. It would give it some data as well, as you can see here from the data of the body. We pick up a JSON value, and we also retrieve the order ID from there. Then we just build our state object, which in this case is just a key value pair. State in Dapr, there are key value pairs. In this case, we use Redis to store this key value pair. So here you see the key is order and then the value is data. To actually save the state, as we said, it's nothing more than posting, in this case, to an HTTP URL. In fact, to this one here, which is Dapr. And we simply post that the data that we have here in the body. So we stringify the state that we have there, and we post that to the state store. So just doing this using fetch, and then this piece of code will basically save the state, right? To retrieve the state, I just need to do a get to / order. That's all I need to do there. Now, how do we actually run this application now? Because I would like to have this running on my system. And of course, Dapr should also be working. Because I'm not on Kubernetes right now, cannot do things like sidecars and so on. So we just run Dapr, and Dapr runs our application for us. So Dapr has the run command. So Dapr run. We need to provide an application ID. I'm just going to call it Node, so app ID Node, because this application is also listening for request, and Dapr needs to know, of course, where the request should go to. We need to tell Dapr, look, the application port in this case is 3000. That was defined here. That's the port on which Express is listening for incoming requests. And then, of course, we tell Dapr to run our Node app. So we do it like this, Node and then app.js. Now, of course, I need to make sure I'm in the correct folder. So we will just copy this here. I will go to the Node folder. We open it in the terminal. And then we run the command. So what you'll see now is Dapr starting. Dapr also runs app.js for us. And now we can actually start working with Dapr here. Now, if you look at my Visual Studio Code, there's also a Dapr extension installed. So if I click on Dapr, you'll see that indeed there's a Dapr application running with an app ID, which is called Node. And I can do all sorts of things. I can say, let's invoke an application method, or let's indeed post an application method, right? So if I want to do a post, in this case, I could do this to new order. First of all, of course, would like to know what kind of format the data should be. We'll see this later in the Python example, where in the Python example, we basically say, look, this is the data that we are going to post to our application, right? So I'll just copy this over here. Go back to the Dapr extension. Want to say invoke. What do we want to invoke? Well, there's a new order method on this service, so that's okay. And then the actual JSON payload is this, but I will give it order ID, for instance, 100, and I'm just doing enter here, right? So what happens? We get some output. He says, yeah, this method succeeded. If I go back to the terminal, we see indeed that our application, the Node app, is doing some output and says, yeah, I got a new order. Order ID is 100, and I save state into the database. Now, it's of course interesting that we can also check this in Redis. So let's just check that out. So with Docker exec, we're going to look at the Redis container here. We're going to run the shell. We're going to do the Redis CLI, and I should type Redis CLI correctly. And then we can do keys and then the pattern. And now we see that we have a node and then order key. Yeah, indeed, because you have multiple services that could write their state to Redis, there needs to be some kind of a method to of course not clash these different keys. So the key is not just the order key, yeah, that we have specified. No, it's the application ID and then the order key. Good. Now, how do I get the order key? I have to use, in this case, getAll, and we're using the key here, node order. And if we do that, he says, oh yeah, well, indeed, I have here this information. I have indeed data order ID 100 version 1. So that's basically it. That's the state which gets saved into our Redis database, and it's easy for us to check out that what the current value of that state really is. Right. So that's already great. We have this app running, and again, just think the functionality we use here of Dapper is just this. Let's say a simple example of state management, where you save a key value pair to a state store. In this case, the default state store on your system, which when Dapper is installed with Dapper in it, will be a Redis container running on your machine. So it's clear you also need Docker installed, otherwise this would never work, right? Okay, there's a way to use other state stores. By the way, I'll take a look in a moment how you can actually do that. Now, I want to have a second service running as well on my system. I only have one service now. I'd like to have another one, and you of course know this will be the Python app. The Python app will use the remote service invocation capabilities, or the service invocation capabilities of Dapper. Let's look at that example here. And again, this is from the Getting Started guide. I have an application, or an app.py Python application. It's a very similar thing here. The Dapper port will say, well, it's 3500 if nothing is defined in an environment variable. And of course, the Dapper URL we'd like to invoke is the new order method of our service. Yeah. Now, what we actually have to tell Dapper, because we're not going to invoke the service directly, we're going to invoke the service through Dapper. In that case, service invocation is indeed an HTTP call to Dapper on localhost, right? v1.0/invoke, so not /state. And then the name of the application, so the app ID that we specified when we started our Node app, then just method, and then the name of the method we'd like to call. In this case, that's the new order method, right? And we'll need to post to that method, right? Now, of course, the actual posting is something you have to do yourself still. In this case, we do a very simple thing. What the sample is doing a simple thing. We just loop forever, and we're going to post orders with increasing order IDs. Very, very simple. And to actually save that order, we need to do this remote service invocation, right? So we just do a post to a local URL, the local Dapper URL. we specify the fact that our JSON is what's in this message variable here. And we also set a timeout of 5 seconds. And we repeat this every 1 second. Of course, to run this, we'll need to open a new terminal, and we'll need to actually open it. I'll delete this one again. We're gonna open it from here, right? We're gonna go to the Python app, and we're gonna run the Python app just like you ran the Node app. So we do Dapr run. Dapr run. We specify also an app ID. So in this case, the app ID will be the we just call it Python. Doesn't really matter what we call it. I don't need to specify a port here in this case because there's nothing listening here, right? We're just invoking remote service, so Dapper does not need to know any kind of local port that we listen on because there is none. Very simple. And then we just call Python on our local system, Python 3, and we run app py, of course, and we do it like this. So Dapper starts our application, and he now is going to start posting data here. Now, if we're going to our Node app and the logs, you'll of course see now in this case that every second we are posting a new order. What you'll also see if you go to your Node.js, to your Redis CLI, and you do hgetAll, of course it's overwritten, right? The version, of course, is also rising, so version 15 now, and order ID is 14. So we have this state being saved to our application. And of course, I can now see within Dapper that I have these two applications running. And here, of course, I can also do a get to actually get the order from the Node service as well. And you'll see as well, we are currently now at order ID 28. So what you have seen, or what you see in this case, is we have our two Dapper applications started. One Dapper application is using the state management to save some state into Redis. The other one, the Python app, is using the invocation features of Dapper to call a service or a method in our Node application, right? So that's something which is clearly happening now, as you can see. Now, if we go back to our application, the next step, of course, would be to create a Kubernetes version of this. In a next video, we'll take a look at that. And to switch things up a little bit, we will also use Cosmos DB for state management. But that's for a next video. Great. Hope you like this one. Stay tuned for the other ones. Take care. See you next time.